Sometimes the person who saves you is the last one you'd ever expect. Emma Dawson learned that truth on a cold autumn night when her worst nightmare walked through the door of the town dance. Her ex-husband had found her, and she could see the rage in his eyes from across the room. Terrified and alone, she turned to the only man nearby, Brennan, the quiet mountain man everyone avoided. She leaned close and whispered, "Help me. My ex is here." What Cole did next shocked everyone in that room. He pulled her into his arms without a word and claimed her as his own. The look he gave her ex-husband promised something the whole town would talk about for years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The town of Pine Ridge, Montana, sat nestled in a valley where the mountains met the plains, a place where civilization brushed up against wilderness and sometimes lost the argument. In the autumn of 1887, it was a settlement of perhaps 300 souls, most of them decent folk trying to make honest livings from stubborn land. The main street boasted a general store, a church with a proud white steeple, a modest hotel, a blacksmith's forge that rang from dawn until dusk, and a saloon that the respectable ladies pretended not to notice, but whose presence kept the peace in its own rough way. At the edge of town, past the last of the residential cabins, stood a one-room schoolhouse painted white with red trim. It wasn't much to look at, but it represented something important to the community, a commitment to the future, to the idea that their children would have better opportunities than they'd had. Inside that schoolhouse, 5 days a week, Emma Dawson taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and whatever else she could manage with students ranging from 5 years old to 14. Emma was 34 that autumn, though most folks in Pine Ridge would have guessed younger. She had the kind of quiet prettiness that didn't announce itself, soft brown hair she wore in a simple bun, hazel eyes that reflected whatever light found them, and a way of moving that suggested she'd learned long ago not to draw attention. She'd arrived in Pine Ridge 6 months earlier with a single trunk, a teaching certificate from a Street Louis normal school, and a desperate need to disappear. The town had asked few questions. Teachers were scarce on the frontier, especially ones with proper credentials, and Emma had good references, or at least she'd presented letters that looked official enough. She'd taken a small room in the home of Pastor Samuel Whitfield and his wife, Mary, paying her rent with a portion of her modest salary. The rest she saved with a discipline that spoke of hard-learned lessons about security. Her students adored her. She had a gift for making lessons interesting, for understanding which child needed gentle encouragement and which needed a firm hand. She never raised her voice, never wielded the switch that hung by the door, that alone made her different from the teachers most of the parents remembered from their own childhoods. The children sensed something else too, though they were too young to name it. Emma understood fear. When Billy Thompson came to school with bruises poorly hidden beneath his collar, Emma knew without asking what kind of home he came from. She'd been that child once, and later, that woman. In Street Louis, she'd been Emma Hartwell, daughter of a bank clerk, educated beyond what was common for women of her station. At 22, she'd married Jacob Dawson, a charming veteran with a ready smile and prospects in the freight business. For the first year, she'd convinced herself she was happy. By the second year, she'd learned that Jacob's charm was a mask for something cold and controlling. By the third year, she'd understood that the mask could slip entirely when they were alone, and no one could hear her scream. She'd endured it for 8 years. 8 years of walking on eggshells, of monitoring his moods, of carefully managing every word and gesture to avoid triggering his rage. She'd become a ghost in her own life, invisible and silent. The worst part wasn't the violence, though that was terrible enough. The worst part was how he'd convinced her it was her fault, that if she could just be better, quieter, more obedient, everything would be fine. The fire that destroyed their home had been an accident, a knocked-over lamp, neighbors said. probably happened when Jacob was away on business. Emma Hartwell was presumed dead in the flames. No body was found, but the heat had been intense enough to consume everything. Jacob had mourned publicly and appropriately. He'd even accepted condolences with what looked like genuine grief. What no one knew was that Emma had set that fire herself, carefully, deliberately, after months of planning. She'd packed her essentials weeks earlier, hidden them with a sympathetic neighbor who asked no questions. The night Jacob left for a 3-day trip to Chicago, she'd staged the scene, lit the lamp, and walked away from Emma Dawson forever. She'd become Emma Hartwell again, using her maiden name, and headed west with the determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. Pine Ridge had been far enough, remote enough, different enough from Street Louis that she'd felt finally like she could breathe. And then there was Cole Brennan. Cole lived in the mountains east of town, in a cabin he'd built with his own hands 3 years ago when he'd first arrived in the territory. He was 38, tall and broad-shouldered in the way of men who worked hard and ate simple. His hair was dark brown, shot through with early grey, usually a bit too long, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. He had steady grey eyes that didn't miss much and didn't reveal much either. The town knew very little about Cole, and that was exactly how he wanted it. He came down from his mountain once a month for supplies, flour, salt, ammunition, lamp oil, whatever else he couldn't hunt, grow, or make himself. He was polite in his transactions, paid in cash or with furs to trade, and didn't linger for conversation. The shopkeepers found him courteous, but remote. The men who'd tried to engage him in the saloon's camaraderie had learned quickly that Cole didn't drink much and didn't talk at all about where he'd come from or why he'd chosen to live like a hermit. What the town did know, or thought they knew, came from rumor and speculation. Someone claimed to have recognized him as a former army scout. Someone else swore they'd seen scars on his hands that looked like torture marks. A traveling peddler said he'd heard of a Cole Brennan who'd been decorated for valor in the Indian Wars, then disappeared after his entire unit was massacred in an ambush. The stories varied, but they all agreed on one thing: Cole Brennan had seen violence and wanted no more of it. The truth, as it often is, was more complicated. Cole had indeed served as an army scout, and he'd been good at it, good enough to be promoted to lead a small, specialized unit tasked with reconnaissance in hostile territory. For 3 years, he and his men had performed their duties with efficiency and minimal casualties. Cole had learned to read the land, to sense danger before it materialized, to keep his people alive in situations where most men would have panicked. And then, one autumn morning in 1884, he'd led 12 men into a canyon in the Montana Territory, following intelligence that a band of renegades was using it as a staging ground. The intelligence had been wrong, or worse, deliberately false. His unit had walked into a carefully prepared ambush. Cole survived because he'd been at the point position and had the presence of mind to take cover when the first shots rang out. He'd fought his way back toward his men, trying to rally them, trying to mount a defense. By the time the shooting stopped, 11 of his 12 men were dead. The 12th died in Cole's arms an hour later, after Cole had driven off the attackers and secured the position. That man, a boy really just 19 years old, had used his last breaths to tell Cole it wasn't his fault, that no one could have known. Cole had never believed him. He'd resigned his commission, collected his final pay, and disappeared into the wilderness. For 3 years now, he'd lived alone, speaking to people only when necessary, avoiding attachment, avoiding responsibility, avoiding the possibility that his judgment might fail again and cost someone their life. The annual harvest dance was not the kind of event Cole typically attended. He'd come to town for supplies that day and had planned to head back up the mountain before dark. But Pastor Whitfield had intercepted him outside the general store, had spoken to him with the gentle persistence of a man who made his living caring for souls, and had somehow convinced Cole that isolation wasn't the same as peace. So Cole had found himself that evening, standing awkwardly at the edge of the community hall, watching families laugh and dance and celebrate another year of survival on the frontier. He'd told himself he'd stay an hour, make the pastor happy, then slip away. He'd been there perhaps 45 minutes, nursing a cup of punch and counting the minutes until he could politely leave, when Emma Dawson materialized at his elbow with terror in her eyes and whispered 5 words that would change everything. "Help me. My ex is here." Cole had noticed the man the moment he walked through the door. Years of military training had left him with instincts he couldn't turn off even when he wanted to, the ability to assess a room, identify threats, catalogue exits. This man radiated wrongness the way a rattlesnake radiates danger. He was perhaps 40, dressed in a suit that had seen better days, his face flushed from recent drinking, though he walked steady enough. But it was his eyes that told the story. They swept the room with the focused intensity of a predator hunting specific prey. Cole had been peripherally aware of Emma all evening. Hard not to be, she was one of the few unattached women present, and her quiet grace drew the eye, even as her demeanor discouraged approach. He'd noticed how she kept to the edges of the room, how she smiled at her students and their families, but never quite relaxed, never quite let her guard down. He'd recognized something in that careful watchfulness, that constant awareness of surroundings. He'd seen it in his own reflection often enough. Now he watched her face drain of color as she saw the man in the doorway, watched her body go rigid with a fear so profound it was almost tangible. And he knew, with the certainty of someone who'd seen every flavor of human violence, that this woman was looking at someone who'd hurt her badly and would do so again given the chance. Emma's mind had gone blank with terror. For 6 months she'd lived with the constant low-level fear of discovery, but she'd almost convinced herself it wouldn't happen. Jacob thought she was dead. She'd been so careful, left no trail, used her maiden name. How had he found her? How had he known? But those questions were luxuries she couldn't afford in this moment. Jacob had spotted her. She saw the recognition flash across his face, saw his expression transform from hunting to having found. He smiled. And she remembered that smile, the one that preceded pain, the one that meant he'd decided she needed to be taught a lesson. She had perhaps 30 seconds before he crossed the room. The hall was crowded with families, children, people she'd come to care about. If Jacob made a scene here, if he claimed her as his wife, and he would, he'd proclaim it to anyone who'd listen her carefully, rebuilt life would shatter. And if she tried to run, if she tried to leave through the back door, he'd follow. He'd corner her somewhere private, somewhere no one could intervene. Her eyes landed on Cole Brennan, standing alone by the refreshment table, and something in her made a decision before her conscious mind caught up. He was the most dangerous-looking man in the room, the one everyone gave a wide berth, and he was right there. She crossed to him in quick steps that she tried to keep from looking like flight. Up close, he was even more imposing, easily 6 inches taller than her, with the solid build of someone who'd spent his life doing hard physical work. But his eyes, when they met hers, weren't cruel. They were careful and guarded, but not cruel. "Help me," she whispered, leaning close enough that only he could hear. "My ex is here." She saw him process the information, saw his gaze flick past her to Jacob, who was now weaving through the crowd toward them, saw him assess the situation with what looked like military efficiency, and then, without hesitation, without asking a single question, Cole Brennan set down his cup and offered her his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Dawson?" His voice was deeper than she'd expected, rough from disuse but steady. She took his hand, his palm was calloused and warm, and he led her smoothly onto the floor just as the fiddler struck up a waltz. Cole positioned them deliberately, Emma realized, so that she was on the inside of the floor, shielded by his body from Jacob's approach. "The man in the brown suit," she said quietly as they began to move. "That's him. I know." Cole's hand rested properly on her waist, his other hand holding hers with surprising gentleness for someone so clearly capable of violence. Stay close to me. Let me handle this. Emma had spent 8 years with a man who gave orders that were really threats. But this wasn't that. Cole wasn't commanding her. He was offering protection, offering to stand between her and danger. The difference made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. They managed perhaps half a minute of dancing before Jacob reached the edge of the floor. Cole turned them smoothly so he could watch Jacob's approach while keeping Emma safely positioned. When Jacob stepped onto the floor, clearly intending to cut in, Cole simply moved, adjusting their path so that other couples blocked Jacob's access. "Emma," Jacob's voice cut through the music, loud enough that nearby dancers turned to look. "Emma, I need to speak with you." The room began to notice the disturbance. The fiddler's bow wavered slightly. Conversations quieted as people sensed drama unfolding. Cole brought them to a stop, still maintaining his protective positioning. He looked at Jacob with the flat, assessing gaze of a man who'd stared down worse threats and lived to tell about it. "The lady is dancing," Cole said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "And I don't believe she wants to speak with you." Jacob's face reddened further. "And this is a private matter between a husband and wife." Emma felt the room's attention sharpen, felt the weight of judgment beginning to form. A wife who'd abandoned her husband, that's how it would look. That's how Jacob would spin it. "I'm not," she started, but Cole's hand tightened slightly on hers, a gentle signal. "I don't know who you think this woman is," Cole said, his tone conversational but with an edge of steel underneath. "But Miss Dawson is a respected teacher in this community, and she's made it clear she has no wish to speak with you. I suggest you respect that and move along." Jacob took a step closer. He was a smaller man than Cole, slighter in build, but there was a dangerous energy coming off him now. "I don't know who you think you are, mountain man, but this doesn't concern you. Emma, stop this foolishness and come with me. We need to talk." "She's not going anywhere with you." Cole's voice had gone quieter, which somehow made it more menacing. "And if you take one more step in her direction, we're going to have a problem." Sheriff Tom Beckett had been standing near the punch bowl, and now he moved forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. He was a big man, gone slightly soft in middle age, but he still had the authority of his office and the respect of the community. "Gentlemen," he said, his tone making it clear he was using the word loosely, "I think we'd best take this outside. No need to ruin the evening for everyone here." Jacob turned to him immediately, his expression shifting to something wounded and reasonable. It was a transformation Emma had seen 100 times, Jacob's ability to become whatever the situation required, to make himself the sympathetic party, the wronged husband, the voice of reason. "Sheriff, thank God, this man is keeping me from my wife. Emma and I had a misunderstanding, and I've come all this way to reconcile with her. I don't know what she's told these people, but we're legally married, and I have every right." "Emma Dawson is not married?" Pastor Whitfield's voice came from the edge of the crowd. He'd moved closer, his wife Mary beside him, both wearing expressions of concern. "She came to us with proper documentation, Sheriff. She's a widow." Jacob laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Is that what she told you? I assure you, I'm very much alive, as you can see. My wife has always been prone to dramatics. She ran away after a disagreement, and I've been searching for her for months. Emma, please, let's go somewhere private and talk about this like adults." Emma found her voice, though it shook. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Jacob. I left for good reason, and you know it." "What reason?" Jacob spread his hands, playing to the crowd now. "Because I worked long hours to provide for you? Because I expected you to manage our household? Tell me, Emma, what terrible crime did I commit that justified abandoning your marriage vows?" Cole felt Emma trembling, felt her beginning to fold under the public pressure, under Jacob's manipulation, under the weight of people's stares and judgment. He'd seen this before. Abusers were often charming, convincing, able to make their victims look unreasonable. He made a decision. "The lady told you no," Cole said, his voice cutting through Jacob's performance. "That's all that matters. Now the sheriff asked us to take this outside, so let's do that. You, me, and the sheriff can have a conversation about how this is going to go." Jacob's mask slipped for just a moment, and Emma saw the rage underneath, saw the calculation in his eyes as he assessed Cole, trying to determine if he could take him in a fight. She knew Jacob well enough to know what he was thinking. He'd never been one to back down from a confrontation, especially not in front of witnesses. His pride wouldn't allow it. "Fine," Jacob said. "Let's talk outside. But Emma is coming too. She's still my wife, Sheriff. Whatever story she's told you people. I have the marriage certificate to prove it." Emma's heart sank. If he had documentation, if he could prove they were legally married, the law would be on his side. A wife was her husband's property in most territories, with few rights of her own. The fact that she'd run away could even be used against her. Cole released her hand, but only so he could offer her his arm. "Miss Dawson will come if she chooses to," he said, "but she'll be standing next to me and you'll keep your distance." "Sheriff?" Beckett nodded, clearly not happy with the situation, but recognizing that it needed to be contained before violence erupted in front of the whole town. "Everyone else, please continue with your evening. Pastor, perhaps the fiddler could resume?" The crowd parted reluctantly as Cole escorted Emma toward the door, Sheriff Beckett following, and Jacob trailing behind with barely contained fury in every line of his body. Emma could feel everyone's eyes on her, could imagine the conversations that would happen once they left, could feel her carefully built new life beginning to crumble. But Cole's arm under her hand was solid and steady, and when she glanced up at his face, she saw something there that gave her a flicker of hope. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't going to let Jacob simply take her. Whatever happened next, at least she wasn't facing it alone. The cool night air hit them as they stepped outside, and Emma drew a shaky breath. Behind them, the fiddle started up again, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. The dance would continue. Life would go on. But for Emma, everything had just changed again, and she had no idea if this time the change would save her or destroy her. The ride up to Cole's cabin took most of the morning. They left before dawn, quietly, Emma carrying only what she could fit in a single bag. She'd left a note for the Whitfields explaining she needed time away from town and would be safe. She didn't say where she was going. Better they could truthfully claim not to know if anyone asked. The mountain trail was steep and narrow in places, winding through stands of pine and aspen that were just beginning to turn gold with the season. Emma rode behind Cole on his sturdy mare, her arms around his waist for balance, and despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the chaos her life had become, she felt something close to peace. Up here, with the clean scent of pine and the sound of wind through the trees, Jacob's threats seemed distant and less powerful. Cole's cabin appeared suddenly as they crested a ridge, a solid log structure with a stone chimney tucked into a clearing that overlooked the valley below. It was larger than Emma had expected, well-built and well-maintained, with a small barn for the horses and what looked like a root cellar built into the hillside. "It's beautiful," Emma said as Cole helped her down from the horse. And it was not just the cabin itself, but the whole setting. The view stretched for miles, showing Pine Ridge as a tiny collection of buildings in the distance, the surrounding mountains rising in layers of blue and purple toward the horizon. "It suits me," Cole said simply. He led the horse to the barn, Emma following, and she watched as he tended to the animal with practiced efficiency. Everything about the way Cole moved spoke of competence and self-sufficiency. This was a man who'd learned to rely on himself for everything. Inside, the cabin was spare but comfortable. A large main room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a stone fireplace that clearly provided both heat and cooking capability. A wooden staircase led to a sleeping loft above. The furniture was simple but well-crafted, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, shelves lined with books and supplies. "You can have the loft," Cole said, setting her bag down. "I'll sleep down here by the fire." Emma looked around the space that was so distinctly Cole's, organized, purposeful, solitary. "I feel like I'm intruding on your life." "You're not." He began building up the fire, his back to her. "Truth is, it's good to have someone here. Place has been too quiet for too long." Over the next few days they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Emma discovered that Cole was a better cook than she'd expected, simple fare, but well prepared. He showed her how he smoked meat for preservation, how he identified edible plants, how he read the weather in the behavior of birds and clouds. In return, she organized his somewhat chaotic collection of books, mended shirts that had been sitting in a basket waiting for attention, and brought a kind of domestic order to the cabin that it had been lacking. They talked more than Emma had talked to anyone in years. Cole told her about his childhood on a farm in Virginia, about the brother he'd lost to fever when they were boys, about how he'd joined the army, more to escape his father's expectations than from any particular patriotic fervor. Emma shared stories of her own childhood, her father's dreams of her marrying well, and her mother's quiet support of her desire for education, the teaching position she'd held before Jacob that she'd given up when they married. "I used to love teaching," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, the day's work done. "Loved watching children's faces when they finally understood something, when reading or numbers suddenly made sense. Jacob made me give it up, said it wasn't proper for his wife to work, that it reflected poorly on his ability to provide. And you gave it up?" Cole's tone held no judgment, just curiosity. "I did." Emma stared into the flames. "I tell myself I was young, that I didn't understand what I was surrendering, but the truth is I knew. I just thought love was supposed to mean sacrifice. Took me years to understand the difference between healthy compromise and losing yourself piece by piece." Cole was quiet for a moment. "I think we all make choices we regret when we're trying to be who someone else needs us to be. The trick is recognizing it before you lose everything. Is that what happened with the army? You were trying to be what they needed." "Maybe." He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. "I was good at my job, Emma. I was. But I let myself get confident, stopped questioning orders, stopped trusting my own instincts. That's how the ambush happened. Someone told me the intelligence was solid, and I believed them instead of doing my own reconnaissance. 12 men died because I was too willing to be the good soldier instead of the careful one." Emma heard the pain in his voice, the guilt he carried like a physical weight. "Who gave you the intelligence?" "Another scout, man named—" He stopped abruptly, and Emma saw his face go pale in the firelight. "Man named Jacob Dawson." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and yet making terrible sense. Emma's mind raced. Jacob was in the army? He was. Cole's voice had gone flat, emotionless. "I'd forgotten we only overlapped for about 6 months. And after the ambush, I was so focused on blaming myself that I didn't." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "How many Jacob Dawsons could there be? But surely it's not the same man. That would be—" "Wait." Emma stood to her, heart pounding. "Cole, when did the ambush happen? What year?" "October 1884. Jacob and I married in December 1884. Emma felt cold despite the fire's warmth. "He told me he'd just left the army, that he wanted a fresh start. He had money saved up, more than made sense for a regular soldier's pay. I asked about it once, and he got angry, told me it was none of my business." Cole had gone very still. "What did he look like back then?" "Same as now. Younger, but yes. Medium height, dark hair, blue eyes." Emma's mind was connecting pieces she didn't want to fit together. "He had scars on his back. Told me they were from an Indian attack when he was scouting. Said he barely survived. There was no Indian attack on the ambush." Cole's voice was barely above a whisper. "It was set up to look like one, but the patterns were wrong, the tactics were wrong. I suspected at the time that someone white had arranged it. Maybe sold information to hostiles about where we'd be. But I couldn't prove anything, and Jacob disappeared before I could question him properly. Emma felt sick. You think Jacob set up the ambush deliberately? That he got your men killed? I think it's possible. Cole turned to face her, and she saw fury in his eyes along with the pain. Hostiles would have paid well for information about army movements, and Jacob always did like money more than loyalty. So he took the blood money, left the army, and married me 2 months later. Emma sat down heavily in the rocking chair. All this time, I thought I knew the worst of what he was capable of. But if he did this, if he murdered those men for profit, then he's more dangerous than we thought. Cole's hands had curled into fists. And I've been letting him walk around Pine Ridge, making threats when I should have. Should have what? Emma stood, moved to him, placed her hand on his arm. Cole, you can't know for certain it's the same man. And even if it is, going after him for something that happened 3 years ago. He killed my men, Emma. Cole's voice broke. If it's him, if he's the one who sold us out, then he'll answer for it. Emma's voice was firm. But not through vigilante justice, not by you throwing away your freedom for revenge. We'll find a way to prove it, to make him answer legally. But Cole, I need you to promise me you won't do something rash. Cole looked at her, and she saw the war in his eyes, the part of him that wanted vengeance warring with the part that wanted to be better than that. Finally, he nodded, though it looked like it cost him. We need to find out for certain, he said. If it's the same Jacob Dawson, there will be army records, service information, maybe a photograph. Would you recognize him? It's been 3 years and people change. I'd recognize him. Cole's voice was certain. I've seen his face in my nightmares often enough. If your ex-husband is the man who betrayed my unit, I'll know. They made a plan. Cole would ride back down to Pine Ridge the next day, carefully, avoiding being seen. He'd go to the sheriff, ask to see if there was any information about Jacob's background, any service records that might have been requested when Jacob first showed up claiming marital rights. Meanwhile, Emma would stay at the cabin where she was safe. That night, Emma lay in the loft, listening to Cole moving around below, unable to sleep. She thought about Jacob, about the man she'd married. She'd known he was cruel, had experienced his violence firsthand. But this, the calculated betrayal of men who'd trusted him, the willingness to see them die for money, was evil on a scale she hadn't imagined. And yet, in a terrible way, it made sense. Jacob had always been able to compartmentalize, to justify anything he did as someone else's fault or as necessary for his own advancement. If he could rationalize beating his wife, why not betraying his fellow soldiers? She heard Cole climb the stairs, pause at the entrance to the loft. Emma, you awake? Yes. If it is him, if it's the same man, I need you to know that changes things. He's not just an abusive husband you can divorce and move on from. He's a killer, and he's gotten away with it. Men like that don't stop. I know. Emma sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. In the darkness, she could just make out Cole's silhouette. What are you saying? I'm saying this might not end with legal papers and separation. He might push until one of us, him or me, doesn't walk away. Emma felt fear curl in her stomach, but also something else, a kind of clarity. Then we'll face that if it comes. But Cole, whatever happens, thank you for telling me the truth, for not keeping this from me to spare my feelings. You deserve to know what you're up against. Cole's voice was gentle in the darkness. And Emma, I won't let him hurt you. Whatever he's done, whatever he's capable of, he won't touch you. I swear it. I believe you, Emma said, and realized she meant it. This man, who'd started as a stranger, she'd begged for help in a moment of desperation, had become someone she trusted more than she'd trusted anyone in years. Cole, will you stay up here? Just not for anything improper. I just don't want to be alone with my thoughts right now. She heard him hesitate, then climb the rest of the way up. He settled on the floor beside the bed, his back against the wall, and in the darkness, Emma reached down and found his hand. He held it gently, his calloused palm warm against hers, and they sat like that in the quiet until exhaustion finally pulled Emma under into uneasy sleep. Cole returned from town the next afternoon with news that confirmed their worst fears. Sheriff Beckett had been willing to share what little information he'd gathered about Jacob, including the fact that Jacob had indeed served in the army as a scout, had been discharged in November 1884. Under circumstances the sheriff's brief telegram inquiry had described as complicated, and that there was an outstanding inquiry about his potential involvement in an incident that had resulted in casualties. More damning, Cole had gone to the hotel and bribed a clerk to let him see the guest register where Jacob had signed in. The handwriting matched signatures Cole had seen 3 years ago on requisition forms and reports, and when the clerk had mentioned, unprompted, that Mr. Dawson had spoken fondly of his time out west as a scout, had even mentioned serving in Montana Territory, the pieces fell into place with horrible certainty. Emma's ex-husband was the man who'd betrayed Cole's unit. "What are you going to do?" Emma asked as they sat at the cabin table. The evidence spread between them like an indictment. "I don't know." Cole's voice was raw with anger, barely held in check. "Part of me wants to ride down there right now and beat the truth out of him. Make him admit what he did. Make him pay for every one of those lives. But that would make me a murderer too, and it wouldn't bring them back." Cole pushed away from the table, paced to the window. "I've spent 3 years blaming myself for their deaths. 3 years convinced it was my failure that got them killed. And now I find out it wasn't my fault, it was his. He set us up, probably sold our position, and planned movements to hostiles for money. And then he went on to live his life, to marry you, to—" He broke off, his shoulders rigid with tension. Emma went to him, placed a hand on his back. "We'll find a way to prove it," she said. "We'll contact the army, get his service records, build a case. He'll answer for what he did. That could take months, years even. And in the meantime, he's free to threaten you, to try to force you back with him, to—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "He killed one of my horses last night. The old gelding I kept in the meadow below the cabin." Emma felt cold. "How do you know it was him?" "Because he left a note pinned to the poor animal's body. Said this is what happens to things that get in his way." Cole's hands were shaking with rage. "He found this place, Emma. He tracked us here. We're not safe even up here." Fear shot through Emma, sharp and immediate. "Then we need to leave. Go somewhere he can't find us." "No," Cole's voice was firm. "No more running. He wants me to know he found us, wants us scared and off balance. That's how he operates, through fear and intimidation. But I'm not playing his game anymore. So, what do we do?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice had the careful control of someone making a difficult decision. "We set a trap. Use you as bait to draw him out somewhere we control, somewhere I can end this." "End it how?" Emma's voice was sharper than she intended. "Cole, you just said you didn't want to become a murderer." "I don't want to, but I'm starting to think it might be the only way to keep you safe." He met her eyes, and she saw the conflict there, the good man wrestling with the temptation of violent justice. "He's not going to stop, Emma. Men like him don't stop until someone makes them." Emma took his face in her hands, made him look at her. "Listen to me. If you kill him, even in self-defense, even to protect me, you'll lose everything. You'll be arrested, tried, probably hanged. And I'll have traded one nightmare for another, losing you to the gallows instead of losing myself to Jacob. Is that what you want?" "I want you safe," his voice broke. "I want him to pay for what he's done. And I want—" He stopped, and Emma saw something shift in his expression, something vulnerable beneath the anger. "What do you want, Cole?" "I want a future where I don't wake up every morning thinking about dead men and failed responsibilities. I want to stop hiding on this mountain, pretending I don't need anyone. And I want—" He paused, then said quietly, "I want you. Not out of obligation or some misguided attempt at redemption. I want you because you make me feel human again." Emma's breath caught. She'd known, on some level, that their connection had deepened beyond protector and protected, but hearing him say it, seeing the raw honesty in his face, made it real in a way she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. "I want that too," she admitted. "But Cole, we can't build anything real while Jacob is between us, and we can't let him turn you into something you're not. If we do this, if we face him, we do it the right way." "What's the right way?" "We gather evidence. We contact the army officially about the ambush. We get the sheriff involved properly." Emma's mind was racing now, putting pieces together. Jacob is arrogant. He's been getting away with things his whole life, and it's made him overconfident. That's his weakness. He'll make a mistake, and when he does, we'll be ready. Cole studied her face, and slowly the rigid anger in his shoulders began to ease. "You've thought about this?" "I've thought about nothing else for days." Emma managed a small smile. "I survived 8 years with him, by learning to think like him, by anticipating his moves. He's predictable in his own way. He'll escalate, that's what he always does, when he doesn't get what he wants immediately, and when he escalates, he'll reveal himself. And if he reveals himself by hurting you, he won't get the chance, because you'll be there." Emma squeezed his hands. "But Cole, you have to promise me. Promise that you won't let rage make your decisions. I need the careful, strategic man who was a good scout, not the one consumed by vengeance." Cole closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, Emma saw that he'd regained some measure of control. "All right, we do it your way. But if he comes at you, if he threatens you directly, all bets are off." "Fair enough." Emma stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest. She felt his arms come around her, careful and protective. "We'll get through this. Together." "Together?" Cole echoed, and in his voice Emma heard not just agreement but something that sounded like hope. They spent the evening making plans. Cole would go back to town, make it clear he was visible and accountable. He'd talk to the sheriff formally about the connection between Jacob and the ambush, start the official process of investigation. Emma would stay at the cabin but would take precautions. Cole showed her where he kept his rifle, taught her how to load and fire it, how to secure the doors and windows, how to signal for help if needed. "He won't come up here directly," Cole said, as he demonstrated the rifle's mechanism. "He's a coward at heart. That's why he sets traps instead of facing people head-on. But if he does, you aim for center mass, and you don't hesitate. I've never shot anyone." Emma's hands trembled slightly as she held the weapon. "Hopefully you won't have to. But if it comes down to him or you, Emma, you choose yourself. Every time. You hear me?" She nodded, and he pulled her close again, his chin resting on top of her head. They stood like that for a long moment, drawing comfort from each other's presence. That night, Cole stayed in the loft again, but this time Emma didn't ask. He simply climbed the stairs when it was time for sleep and settled beside the bed without discussion. In the darkness, Emma reached for his hand again, and he laced his fingers through hers. "Cole," she whispered, "after this is over, after Jacob is dealt with one way or another, do you think you could be happy down in town? Being part of a community again?" "I think I could be happy anywhere you are," he said quietly. "Town, mountain, wherever. You've reminded me that isolation isn't the same as peace. Real peace comes from connection, from having something worth protecting." Emma smiled in the darkness. "I love you, you know. I probably shouldn't say it yet, probably too soon and too complicated, but it's true." She felt Cole's hand tighten on hers. "It's not too soon. And I love you too. Have since that first moment you asked for help and trusted me to give it. Most terrifying and most right thing I've felt in years." They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, hearts beginning to heal, while outside the wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the valley below, Jacob Dawson planned his next move. The photograph changed everything. Emma found it while Cole was in town meeting with the sheriff. She'd been tidying the cabin, trying to keep busy and not think about Jacob lurking somewhere below, when she knocked over a wooden box on one of Cole's shelves. Contents spilled across the floor: military commendations, old letters, personal effects from his army days. And there, among the scattered papers, was a photograph of a group of soldiers. She picked it up, curious despite herself. The image showed 12 men in uniform, some standing, some kneeling, all looking young and serious for the camera. Cole was there, younger and less weathered, his face not yet marked by the grief she saw in it now. And standing right next to him, his hand casually on Cole's shoulder in a gesture of camaraderie, was Jacob. Emma's hands began to shake. She sat down hard on the floor, staring at the photograph, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Jacob looked younger too, perhaps 25 or 26, but it was unmistakably him. Same eyes, same slight smirk, same way of standing that suggested confidence bordering on arrogance. But it was the date written on the back of the photograph that made her feel sick. April 1884. 6 months before the ambush, 6 months before Cole's men were killed. She was still sitting there, the photograph clutched in her hand, when Cole returned 2 hours later. He took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. "Emma? What happened?" She held up the photograph wordlessly. Cole crossed the room, took it from her, and went absolutely still. For a long moment he just stared at it, his face draining of color. "Where did you find this?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "It fell out of a box." "I'm sorry, I wasn't snooping, I just—" Emma's words tumbled over themselves. "Cole, that's him, that's Jacob, standing right next to you." "I know." Cole sat down heavily in the rocking chair, still staring at the photograph. "I'd forgotten this picture existed. We took it after—" He paused, his jaw working. "After we'd completed a particularly successful mission. Everyone was in good spirits. Jacob had just joined our unit about a month before. He seemed like a good man, competent scout, got along well with the others, followed orders. I trusted him. And then 6 months later, he led us into an ambush that killed everyone in this photograph except him and me." Cole's hands tightened on the photograph, crumpling the edges. "Look at their faces, Emma. These men trusted me to keep them safe. And I trusted him." Emma moved to him, knelt beside the chair. "It's not your fault. You couldn't have known. Couldn't I?" Cole's voice was bitter. "I was the commanding officer. It was my job to know. And looking back now, there were signs, small things that didn't quite add up. Times when Jacob would disappear for hours on reconnaissance and come back with information that seemed almost too good, conversations that would stop when I came around. But I ignored it because I wanted to trust my men, because questioning them felt like betraying them." "What kind of signs?" Cole was quiet for a moment, his mind clearly working back through memories he'd tried to bury. The week before the ambush, Jacob volunteered to do solo reconnaissance on the canyon where we eventually got hit. Came back and reported it was clear, perfect for an approach. I should have gone with him, should have verified his report personally, but I was dealing with other logistics. I trusted his word. "He set you up." Emma felt rage building in her chest, hot and fierce. "He scouted the location, probably met with the hostiles then, arranged the whole thing. And then he led you and your men straight into it, and walked away with whatever blood money they paid him." Cole's voice was hollow. "Do you know what the worst part is? During the ambush, when everything went to hell, I saw him. He was supposed to be at the rear, but he was already moving toward cover before the first shots were fired, like he knew exactly when and where the attack would come from. I thought at the time he just had good instincts. Now I know he was saving his own skin. Emma thought about the man she'd married, the man who'd hurt her so systematically. She'd known he was cruel and controlling, but this was a different order of evil. How did he survive? If the hostiles were paying him, why didn't they kill him too? That bothered me at the time, but I couldn't prove anything. The official inquiry called him a lucky survivor, same as me. Cole set the photograph down carefully on the table, as if it might shatter. But now, looking back, I remember he had powder burns on his clothes, but no injuries, no wounds, no close calls. Just convenient placement when the shooting started. We have to show this to the sheriff. Emma picked up the photograph. This is evidence. It proves Jacob was in your unit, proves he was there when the ambush happened. It proves he was there. It doesn't prove he set it up. Cole's voice was tired. We'd need more than a photograph to convict him of betraying his unit. We'd need testimony, documentation, proof of contact with the hostiles. And it's been 3 years. That kind of evidence is long gone. Emma felt frustration building. They knew the truth, could see it clearly, but proving it legally seemed impossible. That's how it's been so far. Cole stood, paced to the window. And he came after you next. How long were you married before the abuse started? About a year. At first it was just words, criticism, control over my social contacts, managing the household money. Then it escalated. Emma's voice was steady despite the memories. Do you think he married me as some kind of what? Cover? Way to look respectable? Maybe? Or maybe he just liked having power over someone. Cole turned to face her. Men who betray their brothers in arms for money aren't operating by normal moral codes. You were probably just another possession to him, another thing to control and use. The thought made Emma feel cold, but it also crystallized something in her mind. Cole, think about this. If he's that calculating, if he's gotten away with murder and betrayal, why is he so focused on getting me back? Why not just let me go? Find someone else to control. Cole's eyes narrowed. Because you escaped, you're the one thing he lost, the one person who got away from him. And his pride can't accept that, which means he'll keep escalating until... Emma stopped, a terrible thought forming. Until one of us is dead. That's how this ends for him, isn't it? He can't let me go, can't let you protect me. He has to win, has to prove he's in control. Then we make sure he loses. Cole's voice had gone hard. But on our terms, not his. They spent the evening going through the rest of Cole's military papers, looking for anything else that might be useful. They found requisition forms with Jacob's signature, mission reports he'd filed, commendations he'd received. Cole remembered names of other soldiers who'd served with them before the ambush, men who might remember something useful about Jacob's behavior or contacts. There was another scout, Cole said suddenly, pulling out a letter. Man named Thomas Garrett. He transferred out of our unit about 2 months before the ambush. I remember he and Jacob didn't get along. There was tension I never quite understood. Tom wrote me after the ambush, said something in his letter that stuck with me. He found the letter, scanned it quickly, then read aloud. I'm sorry about your men, Cole. Wish I'd been there, maybe I could have made a difference. But I'll tell you true, I never trusted Dawson. Something off about him, where he was always asking questions about patrol routes and supply movements. Tried to tell you once, but you said I was being paranoid. Maybe I was. Emma and Cole looked at each other. We need to find Thomas Garrett, Emma said. If he had suspicions about Jacob before the ambush, if he can testify to Jacob's behavior, it still might not be enough for a military tribunal, but it's something. Cole's voice held the first note of hope she'd heard since finding the photograph. And it might be enough to convince the sheriff that Jacob is dangerous, that he has a history of violence and betrayal. Where is Thomas Garrett now? Last I heard, he was working as a scout for the railroad, somewhere in Wyoming territory. Cole moved to his small desk, pulled out paper and pen. "I'll write to him. If he's still at the same posting, he might be willing to come testify, or at least provide a written statement." While Cole composed his letter, Emma studied the photograph again. She looked at the faces of the dead men, so young and unsuspecting, and felt a wave of sorrow for lives cut short by greed and betrayal. And she felt something else too, a strengthening of her resolve. Jacob had taken these men from Cole, had taken years of her own life, had left a trail of damage and pain wherever he went. He wasn't going to get away with it anymore. "Cole," she said quietly, "whatever happens, whatever we have to do, I'm with you. I won't let him destroy anyone else." Cole looked up from his writing, and she saw in his eyes a mixture of love and determination that matched her own feelings. "We'll stop him. Together. But Emma, you need to understand, if this goes wrong, if he comes after you directly, I will kill him. Evidence or no evidence, legal consequences or not, I won't lose you. I know." Emma moved to him, wrapped her arms around him from behind. "And I won't let you throw your life away for revenge. We'll be smart about this. We'll use his arrogance against him. Men like Jacob always think they're smarter than everyone else. That's their weakness. When did you get so strategic?" There was a note of admiration in Cole's voice. 8 years of surviving Jacob taught me to think 3 steps ahead, to anticipate his moves, to look for the angles he'd miss, because he was too busy congratulating himself. Emma rested her chin on Cole's shoulder. "He taught me how to survive him. Now I'm going to use those lessons to stop him." They worked into the night, planning and preparing. Cole would go to town in the morning, show the sheriff the photograph and Thomas Garrett's letter, and formally request that the army reopen the investigation into the ambush. Meanwhile, Emma would stay at the cabin, but she'd be armed and ready. They'd set up signals, smoke patterns during the day, lantern flashes at night, so Cole would know if Jacob approached. As they prepared for sleep that night, Emma found herself thinking about the strange path that had brought her here. She'd run from Jacob, expecting to spend her life looking over her shoulder, always afraid. Instead, she'd found Cole, a man as damaged as she was, carrying his own burdens of guilt and loss, and together they were stronger than either had been alone. "Cole," she said into the darkness of the loft, "after this is over, after we've dealt with Jacob, will you marry me?" She felt him go still beside her. "You're already married. Not for long. When Jacob's arrested and tried, the divorce will be simple. And after that," Emma turned to face him, found his hand in the darkness. "I want to marry you. Not because I need protection, not because I'm running from something, but because I choose you. Because you're the first person in my life who's ever made me feel like an equal partner instead of a possession." Cole's voice was rough with emotion. "Yes, when this is over, when you're free, yes, I'll marry you and spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." They sealed the promise with a kiss, tender and full of hope, and fell asleep holding each other while the mountain night settled around them, and somewhere below, Jacob Dawson planned his next move, unaware that his victims had become his hunters. Cole rode down to Pine Ridge at first light, the photograph and Thomas Garrett's letter secured in his saddlebag. Emma watched him go from the cabin porch, rifle within easy reach, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in her stomach. They'd agreed he'd be gone no more than 6 hours' time to meet with the sheriff, send the telegram to Wyoming, and gather whatever additional information might be useful. If he wasn't back by mid-afternoon, Emma was to assume something had gone wrong. She spent the morning in restless preparation. She cleaned and loaded Cole's spare rifle, positioning it by the door. She checked the windows, making sure they were secure and that she had clear sight lines to the approaches. She prepared food that could be eaten cold if necessary, and she tried very hard not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The sun had climbed to its zenith when she heard it, the crack of a branch in the forest to the east, too loud to be natural, too deliberate. Someone wanted her to know they were there. Emma's heart began to pound. She moved to the window, peering out through the gap in the curtains. At first, she saw nothing. Then movement, a flash of dark clothing among the trees, not close yet, but circling, assessing Jacob. She grabbed the rifle, checked the load with trembling hands. Cole had made her practice, had drilled her on the mechanics until she could do it without thinking. Now she was grateful for his insistence. Another sound, this time from the west. Emma spun, trying to watch both directions at once. Was Jacob alone, or had he brought help? The thought of facing multiple attackers made her mouth go dry. "Emma!" Jacob's voice rang out from the tree line, conversational and almost friendly. "I know you're in there, and I know the mountain man isn't. Saw him ride out this morning. It's just you and me now, and we need to talk." Emma didn't respond. Cole had told her, don't engage, don't give away your position or state of mind. Let him wonder. "Come on, Emma, don't be childish." Jacob's tone sharpened slightly. "You can't hide in there forever. Eventually you'll need to come out, need supplies, need to leave, and I can wait. I'm a very patient man when I need to be." She heard him moving, boots crunching on fallen leaves, closer now. Emma positioned herself where she could see the front door and main window, rifle raised and ready. "I've been thinking about our marriage," Jacob continued, his voice coming from a different direction now. He was circling the cabin, she realized, looking for weak points, about what went wrong between us. "And I'm willing to admit I wasn't always the husband I should have been. I let my work stress affect my home life. I was sometimes harsh when I should have been gentle. But Emma, burning down our house, faking your death? That was excessive, don't you think? Excessive." He was calling her escape excessive, as if his years of abuse were just minor marital friction. Emma felt rage building alongside her fear, and she used it to steady her hands. "I forgive you, though." Jacob sounded magnanimous now, the reasonable man making concessions. "I understand you were frightened and confused. Women can be emotional, prone to dramatic gestures. But I'm here now, and I'm prepared to take you back. We can start fresh, maybe move somewhere new. California, perhaps. Make a new life together." Emma noticed he'd stopped moving. Was he getting ready to approach the door? She adjusted her grip on the rifle, sighting down the barrel at the entrance. "Of course." Jacob's voice went cold. "That offer has an expiration. If you make me wait much longer, if you continue to embarrass me with this stubborn behavior, I'll have to take a firmer hand. You remember how firm my hand can be, don't you, Emma?" The threat was clear, and it brought back a flood of memories. Jacob's fists, his rage, the helpless fear of knowing he could hurt her and no one would stop him. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She'd survived, she'd escaped, she'd rebuilt her life. And she had Cole now, someone who saw her as a partner, not a possession. "Last chance, Emma. Come out now. We talk reasonably, and everyone walks away intact. Stay in there, and I'll have to come get you. And trust me, you won't like how that goes." Emma heard the front door latch rattle. He was testing it, seeing if it was locked. Cole had reinforced it just yesterday, added a solid bar across the inside. It would hold, but not forever if Jacob had tools. The sound of splintering wood made her jump. He'd moved to the window, was using something, maybe a rock or tool, to break the glass. Emma fired a warning shot, deliberately high, the rifle's report deafening in the enclosed space. "The next one won't be a warning." Her voice was steadier than she felt. Jacob laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "You're going to shoot me, Emma? You, who couldn't even raise your voice to me for 8 years. You don't have it in you." But he'd stopped attacking the window. The warning shot had at least made him cautious. "Maybe I do, maybe I don't," Emma called back. "But do you really want to find out? I've got enough ammunition in here to hold you off for hours, and Cole will be back soon. Do you really want to face him? The mountain man." Jacob's voice dripped with contempt. You think he's your savior? You think he cares about you? He's using you, Emma. Men like him don't protect women out of the goodness of their hearts. They do it because they want something in return. You're describing yourself, Jacob. Cole is nothing like you. Isn't he? Jacob moved again, and Emma tracked the sound. Did he tell you about his men? About how he led them into an ambush and got them all killed? Some protector. I know about the ambush. Emma's voice was hard. I also know you're the one who set it up. You sold out your own unit for money. The silence that followed was absolute. Emma could almost feel Jacob recalculating, realizing that his secret was out. When he spoke again, his voice had changed completely. No more charm, no more reasonable husband. Just cold, focused rage. That interfering fool showed you the photograph, didn't he? Couldn't leave well enough alone. Well, Emma, that changes things. You see, as long as you didn't know, I could let you live, take you back, keep you quiet, move on. But now you know too much, which means you're a liability I can't afford. Emma's blood ran cold. This was Jacob without the mask, the calculating killer underneath the charming exterior. You won't get away with it, she said, trying to keep him talking, trying to buy time. Cole's told the sheriff everything. If something happens to me, if something happens to you, the obvious suspect is your overly protective mountain man. He's been hovering around you for weeks. Everyone in town has seen it. You disappear, they'll blame him. Meanwhile, I'm the grieving husband who came to reconcile, but arrived too late. She could hear the smile in his voice. I've always been good at playing the victim, Emma. You know that better than anyone. Emma realized with sickening clarity that he'd thought this through. He had a plan, had probably had one from the moment he decided to find her. She was never supposed to walk away from this. But neither was Cole. You're going to try to kill him too, she said. When he comes back, you'll ambush him, just like you did his men. Now you're thinking strategically. Took you long enough. Jacob's tone was almost approving. I learned my lesson after that business in Montana. Never leave witnesses who can connect you to the crime. Cole dies, you die, and I ride away the tragic figure who lost everything. Maybe I'll even stick around Pine Ridge long enough to attend the funerals. Would that be too much, do you think? Emma forced down panic, made herself think. Jacob was overconfident now, convinced he had control of the situation. That was his weakness, it always had been. He got cocky when he thought he'd won. You're forgetting one thing, Emma said. The letter Cole sent this morning, to Thomas Garrett, the scout who transferred out of your unit before the ambush, the one who never trusted you. Even if you kill us both, that letter will arrive. Garrett will come forward. Your role in the ambush will be exposed. She was bluffing. Cole had planned to send the letter, but she didn't know if he'd had time before Jacob showed up. But the silence from outside suggested the bluff had landed. You're lying. But Jacob's voice had lost some of its certainty. Am I? Cole went to town this morning. You saw him leave. What do you think he was doing there? He met with the sheriff, showed him the photograph, and sent that telegram. By tonight, Garrett will know everything. Within a week, he'll be here with testimony that will put a noose around your neck. Then I'd better work quickly. Jacob's voice had gone flat, emotionless, the voice of a man making a decision to kill. Goodbye, Emma. I'd say it was nice knowing you, but we both know that would be a lie. Emma heard him moving away, back toward the tree line. For a moment, she thought maybe the bluff had worked. Maybe he was retreating. Then she smelled its smoke. He was going to burn her out, the same way she'd burned their house in Street Louis. The symmetry would appeal to his twisted sense of justice. Emma ran to the window, saw smoke beginning to rise from the back of the cabin. He'd set fire to the woodpile stored against the rear wall. The logs were dry from summer, would burn hot and fast. Within minutes, the cabin would be engulfed. She had two choices: stay inside and burn, or go outside and face Jacob directly. Neither was good, but at least outside she had a chance to run, to fight. Emma grabbed the rifle. took a deep breath to steady her nerves, and moved to the door. She removed the bar, grasped the handle, and prepared to face whatever came next. But before she could open it, she heard something that made hope surge in her chest, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats, and Cole's voice shouting her name. He'd come back early. He'd seen the smoke or sensed something was wrong. He was here. Emma threw open the door and ran out into the clearing, smoke beginning to pour from the cabin behind her. She saw Cole racing toward her on his horse, saw him taking in the scene with quick tactical assessment, and she saw Jacob emerging from the tree line, rifle in hand, sighting down the barrel at Cole's approaching form. "Cole, down!" Emma screamed, raising her own rifle. Everything happened in a suspended moment. Cole throwing himself sideways off his horse, Emma's rifle crack splitting the air, Jacob's shot going wide as he dove for cover. The horse bolted, terrified. Cole rolled to his feet behind a large boulder, and Emma ran toward him, zigzagging, making herself a difficult target. More shots rang out, Jacob firing rapidly now. Desperate or panicked, or both. Emma felt something tug at her sleeve, heard the whine of a bullet passing too close. And then she was behind the boulder with Cole, both of them breathing hard, the cabin burning behind them, and Jacob somewhere out there in the trees. "You hit?" Cole's hands were on her, checking for injuries. "No. You. No." He pulled her close for just a second, a fierce embrace. "I came back early because I had a bad feeling, saw the smoke from the valley. Emma, I'm so sorry. I should have known he'd come today. Should have—" "Stop." She put her hand over his mouth. "You're here now. We're both alive, and we're going to end this." Cole looked at her, and she saw in his eyes the warrior he'd been before grief and guilt had driven him into isolation. "Yes," he said. "We are. But Emma, when this is over, when the shooting starts in earnest, I need you to promise me you'll stay down, stay safe, don't try to be a hero. Same to you." Emma checked her rifle, found she had 3 rounds left. "We do this together, or not at all?" Cole smiled grimly. "Together, then." He raised his voice, calling out to Jacob, "Dawson, it's over. Sheriff knows everything. You can't kill us both and get away with it. Give up now, face trial, and at least you'll live." Jacob's answering laugh was sharp and slightly unhinged. "Trial? For what? Killing you? I'll claim self-defense. You attacked me, and I protected myself. No one will question it. They'll question it when Thomas Garrett testifies about your behavior before the ambush, when the army reopens the investigation and finds the evidence you thought was buried." Cole's voice was steady, authoritative. "You're done, Dawson. The only question now is whether you die here or in a prison cell." "Then I guess I'll take my chances here." Jacob opened fire, and Cole and Emma ducked behind the boulder as bullets struck stone, sending chips flying. The climax had begun, and one way or another, it would end today. Sheriff Beckett arrived with 2 deputies an hour later, having seen the smoke from town and come to investigate. By then, Cole's cabin was a smouldering ruin, Jacob was securely bound and guarded, and Emma was tending to the cut on Cole's arm with supplies from his saddlebag. "Well," Beckett said, surveying the scene with the weary expression of a man who'd hoped his quiet town would stay quiet, "suppose you'd better tell me what happened here." They did, taking turns, filling in the gaps in each other's stories. Emma explained about the fire, about Jacob's threats and his admission of planning to kill them both. Cole added the details about the fight, about Jacob's knife attack, about the choice to take him alive. Beckett listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small book he carried. When they finished, he nodded slowly. "That telegram you sent this morning to Thomas Garrett, it went through. Got a reply back already, actually. That's partly why I came up here." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Garrett says he'll be on the next train west. Should be here within the week. Says he's got plenty to tell about Jacob Dawson's activities before the ambush." Jacob, sitting against the tree with a deputy watching over him, went very still. "There's more," Beckett continued. "I also sent inquiries to Street Lewis, to the authorities there about the fire that supposedly killed Mrs. Dawson. They were very interested to hear she was alive. Seems there were some questions about that fire. At the time, neighbors reported seeing someone matching Mr. Dawson's description in the area the night before, despite his claims he was traveling." "I was traveling," Jacob said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe. Or maybe you set that fire yourself, thinking your wife was inside, and were surprised when you found out later she'd escaped." Beckett's tone was mild, but his eyes were hard. "Either way, attempted murder is a serious charge in Missouri. They'll be wanting to talk to you about that, too." Emma felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. Jacob couldn't talk his way out of this. There were too many charges, too many witnesses, too much evidence. He was finally going to answer for what he'd done. "You can't prove any of that," Jacob said, but even he seemed to realize how weak it sounded. "Don't need to prove all of it," Beckett replied. "Just need to prove enough. And son, I've got enough to keep you locked up for a very long time." He gestured to his deputies. "Get him on a horse. We're taking him back to town, and then I'm putting him in the strongest cell I've got while we wait for the federal marshal to arrive." As the deputies hauled Jacob to his feet, he looked back at Emma one last time. She expected rage, expected threats, expected the hatred that had defined their relationship for so long. Instead, she saw something else: defeat. The realization that he'd finally lost, that his control was broken, that the woman he'd tried to destroy had survived, and would go on living long after he was gone. "I loved you once," Jacob said quietly. "In the beginning, I really did." Emma felt cold tense beside her, ready to intervene if this was some manipulation. But she placed a hand on his arm, stepped forward to face Jacob directly. "No," she said, her voice steady and sure. "You didn't. Love doesn't hurt. Love doesn't control or diminish or destroy. You wanted to own me, Jacob. That's not the same thing." She paused, then added, "But I forgive you anyway. Not for your sake, for mine, so I can finally let you go and move forward without carrying the weight of hating you." Jacob stared at her, seeming genuinely confused by her words. Then the deputies led him away toward the horses, and Emma watched him go with a sense of closure she hadn't expected to feel. Cole moved to stand beside her, his good arm sliding around her waist. "That was brave," he said quietly. "The forgiveness. I'm not sure I could do the same." "You will," Emma said, leaning into him. "Maybe not today, maybe not for Jacob, but someday for yourself. You'll forgive yourself for what happened to your men. Because you weren't responsible for their deaths any more than I was responsible for Jacob's abuse. We were both victims of a man who chose evil." Sheriff Beckett approached them, his expression sympathetic. "I'm sorry about your cabin, Brennan. Looks like it's a total loss." Cole looked at the smoldering ruins, and Emma saw acceptance rather than grief in his face. "It's just a building. The important things got out safe." He squeezed Emma's waist gently. "I can build another cabin. Or maybe—" he looked down at Emma. "Maybe it's time I stopped hiding on a mountain and came back to town. If a certain schoolteacher would be willing to court a former hermit properly." Emma smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I think that could be arranged." Beckett cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Speaking of which, there's the matter of Mrs. Dawson's reputation to consider. Town's been talking, and while most folks are sympathetic given the circumstances, there's still—" "My name is Emma Hartwell," Emma interrupted firmly. "I never legally changed it to Dawson couldn't, since I was supposed to be dead. And as soon as the divorce is finalized, that's the name I'll be using. Miss Emma Hartwell, school teacher." She glanced up at Cole. "At least until I have reason to change it to something else." Cole's smile was the warmest thing she'd seen all day. "That sounds like a plan." They rode back to town together, Cole and Emma on his horse, the sheriff and his deputies with their prisoner following behind. The autumn sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and Emma thought about how far she'd come from that terrified woman who'd whispered for help at a dance. She'd found her courage, her voice, and her future. And the man riding beside her had found his way back from isolation and guilt to connection and purpose. They'd both been broken, and somehow, in saving each other, they'd become whole. As they descended into the valley, Emma could see Pine Ridge spread out below, small and imperfect, but home, the schoolhouse where her students waited for her return, the church where she and Cole might someday exchange vows, the streets where they'd walk together, not as protector and protected, but as partners. Jacob would face trial and punishment. Thomas Garrett would testify. The truth about the ambush would come out. And Emma and Cole would be there to see justice done, not out of vengeance, but out of a shared commitment to making sure no one else suffered at Jacob's hands. The nightmare was over. The healing could begin. And tomorrow, Emma thought, tomorrow she'd ring the school bell and teach her students their lessons, and Cole would be there, not guarding her from danger, but simply being present in her life. They'd start building something new, something good, something that honored the people they'd been and celebrated the people they were becoming. Together. That was the word that mattered most. Together, they'd faced the worst and survived. Together, they'd build the future they both deserved. 3 months had passed since the fire, since the confrontation, since Jacob Dawson had been led away in chains. Winter had settled over Pine Ridge with a gentleness that matched Emma's newfound peace. Snow covered the mountains in white silence, and smoke rose from chimneys throughout the town as families gathered against the cold. Emma stood at the window of the small house she now rented on Maple Street, watching the children arrive for school. The town council had been generous after hearing the full story. They'd given her a month's leave with pay to recover, had helped her find proper lodging, and had made it clear that her position was secure. More than that, they'd made her feel welcome in a way she'd never quite felt before. Adversity, it seemed, had transformed her from the mysterious new teacher into someone the community claimed as their own. Cole was building a new cabin on a piece of land just outside town, close enough to be part of the community, far enough to maintain some of the privacy he still craved. Emma visited the site most afternoons after school, bringing him food and company, watching as the structure took shape. It would be bigger than his mountain cabin, with room for a family eventually. The thought still made her nervous and excited in equal measure. The trial had been swift once Thomas Garrett arrived. The former scout had brought not only his testimony about Jacob's suspicious behavior, but also letters he'd written at the time documenting his concerns. Combined with the photograph, Cole's account of the ambush, and the Army's own investigation that revealed financial irregularities in Jacob's accounts dating to that period, the case against him was overwhelming. Jacob Dawson had been convicted of treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and a list of other charges that Emma had stopped keeping track of. The military tribunal had sentenced him to death by hanging. Emma had attended the sentencing not out of vengeance, but out of a need to see it finished, to witness the formal end of the chapter he'd represented in her life. Jacob had looked at her across the courtroom, and for just a moment, she'd seen not the monster who'd tormented her, but the broken, damaged man underneath. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it helped her understand that his cruelty had come from his own emptiness, not from any failure on her part. "I hope you find peace," she'd said to him as they led him away. She wasn't sure if she'd meant peace in this life or the next, but it had felt important to say. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks ago. The judge, given the circumstances, had expedited the process. Emma was legally free, no longer bound to a man who'd tried to destroy her. She'd burned the marriage certificate in her fireplace and watched the ashes rise up the chimney, a symbolic ending to match the practical one. Now, on this cold December morning, Emma had other things on her mind. In her pocket was a letter from Cole, not a proposal exactly, but a question. Would she consider, when the spring came and his cabin was finished, making it their home together? Would she marry him and build a life that was theirs, not haunted by past trauma but informed by it, stronger because of what they'd survived? She'd told him yes 2 days ago, and they'd agreed to keep it quiet until the time was right. But Emma found herself wanting to share the news, wanting to tell her students and the townspeople who'd supported her that she'd found something good after all the darkness. The school bell rang not because she'd rung it, but because Lily Thompson, early as usual, had taken it upon herself to summon the other children. Emma smiled at the girl's initiative and moved to the door to greet her students. "Good morning, Miss Hartwell," they chorused, tumbling into the warm schoolhouse with rosy cheeks and excited chatter about the snow. "Good morning," Emma replied, her heart full. "Take your seats, please. We have a lot to cover today." As the children settled and Emma began the day's lessons, she was aware of Cole outside, visible through the window as he arrived to help repair the schoolhouse's fence, a project the town had hired him for, one of several jobs that had helped him establish himself as a valued member of the community. He caught her eye through the glass and smiled, a private expression meant only for her. At lunch, when the children spilled outside to play in the snow, Cole came to the schoolhouse door with hot coffee and sandwiches. They sat together at Emma's desk, eating and talking about ordinary things, his progress on the cabin, her plans for the students' Christmas program, the letter they'd received from Thomas Garrett, saying he'd be visiting in the spring. "I was thinking," Cole said, setting down his coffee cup, "when we marry, would you want to keep teaching? I know some husbands wouldn't approve, but I'm not some husbands." Emma felt warmth spread through her chest. "I would, very much. Teaching isn't just what I do, it's part of who I am." "Good." Cole took her hand across the desk. "Because watching you with these children, seeing how you help them and protect them and give them confidence, Emma, you're saving lives in your own way, just as surely as if you were pulling them from a fire. I wouldn't want to be the person who took that away from you." "You're a good man, Cole Brennan," Emma said softly. "The kind of man I didn't know existed when I was young and foolish enough to marry for charm instead of character." "You weren't foolish. You were hopeful. There's a difference." Cole squeezed her hand. "And I'm grateful every day that you gave me a chance to prove not all men are like Jacob Dawson." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the children's laughter outside, the ordinary sounds of a life finally at peace. "Sometimes," Emma said, "I think about that night at the dance, about how terrified I was when Jacob walked in, how desperate I felt. And then I think about turning to you, this stranger everyone feared, and asking for help. It was the bravest thing I'd ever done, and the best decision I ever made." "I think about it too," Cole admitted, "about how close I came to not going to that dance at all, to staying on my mountain and never knowing you existed. Sometimes the smallest choices change everything." Pastor Whitfield had agreed to marry them in the spring, in the same church where Emma had spent her first nervous Sunday in Pine Ridge. They'd have a small ceremony, just close friends and Emma's students, nothing elaborate. Emma didn't need elaborate. She just needed Cole, and the promise of a future built on honesty, respect, and genuine love. As the afternoon sun began its descent, and Emma dismissed her students for the day, she stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse and looked out at the town that had become her home. Cole was waiting to walk her back to her house, his hat in his hands, his expression patient and content. The mountains rose behind him, snow-capped and eternal, and Emma thought about how she'd once seen them as a place to hide. Now they were simply beautiful, a backdrop to a life she was actively choosing, actively building, one day at a time. She locked the schoolhouse door, took Cole's offered arm, and together they walked through the quiet streets of Pine Ridge as evening fell and lights began to glow in windows. Behind them, The schoolhouse stood ready for tomorrow's lessons. Ahead of them, their future waited, uncertain in its details, but sure in its foundation. Sometimes, the person who saves you is the last one you'd ever expect. Emma had learned that truth on a cold autumn night, and now, 3 months later, she was learning something even more important: that being saved was just the beginning. The real work, the real joy, came in the saving of each other, day after day, choice after choice, building something together that was stronger than the sum of its parts. And as the winter stars began to emerge in the darkening sky above Montana, Emma Hartwell, soon to be Emma Brennan, felt something she'd thought lost forever. She felt hope.